Hi everyone. Let's learn about shadows and reflections. We're going to start out with an overview and some definitions of shadow terms. Then we'll talk about light sources, both natural and artificial. In the next videos, we'll talk about how to cast shadows in orthographic views and in paraline views. Next week, we'll continue the topic and we'll talk about how to cast shadows in perspective views and touch upon reflections. So starting with some definitions, the first term you need to know is shade. Shade is a part of an object or form which is pointing away from the light. It's not receiving the light. Right? That's different than shadow. Shadow is an image cast on the ground from the object. It's not part of the object itself, so it's different from shade. Let's take a look at an example. Here is a simple box. The light is coming from forward, right, high. All right, and it's pointing directly at kind of that front right side. The front left side of the box is going to be in shade, all right? It's pointing away from the light, all right? Also, the inside of the box there is in the shade. On the ground is the cast shadow, right? And it's the darkest part of our drawing here. And because we live in an atmosphere and light bounces around, your shadows are graduated, right? They're going to be darkest, closest to the object, right, or closest to a corner, and then they're going to lighten farther away from the object. Let's take a look at a similar example from a different textbook, all right? And you can see that in this case, the light source is coming from forward, left, high. And what we have here is a side of the box that's in shade, right here. And then we are casting a shadow on the ground. A couple more definitions. Here are some light rays, and they're showing the light direction, and they're coming from or calling out some important points on the box, right? So those are some parallel light rays. Other important terms, we've got a shadow line, which is simply the outline of where the shadow is falling. And finally, the shadow plane. The shadow plane is going to be this triangular piece right here. It's kind of hatched in a different pattern right here. And that's going to form between the object and the light rays and the shadow line. So starting out, how do you cast a shadow? Well, to produce a shadow, you have to have these three conditions. First of all, you have to have a light source. You have to have an object. The object will cast the shadow line, or you can think of that as the object will intercept the light ray. And finally, there has to be a surface. This is usually the ground plane, or sometimes it's a wall behind the object that will receive the shadow line and receive the shadow. So let's take a look at a point right here. Here is a point floating in space. All right, the light ray passes through that point and throws a shadow on a ground plane. I know you can't see it, but assume that there is a ground plane right here. Right. The next is a shadow of a line. Yes, I know it's line here, interestingly. And here we have a line drawn from point A to point B. All right, think of this as like a pole, like a flag pole, and it's embedded in the ground at point B. The light is going to come through and pass through the top of the flagpole. We're going to cast this ray right here, and it will land on the ground plane at this point here. Right. Next, you will connect your 2 points where the shadow attaches or lands on the ground plane, and that's going to be from A to B. Moving on to the shadow of a plane. You can see that we need to cast multiple points here. So think of this as like a wall. It's a vertical plane sitting on a horizontal ground. And so you can cast your light rays through point A and through point B. And then you're going to connect those right here. And you'll find your shadow on the ground. We can't see all of it, all right? Some of it is hidden behind the object. Finally, you can find the shadow of a solid object. And what you're going to do is, again, cast your light rays or your shadow rays through the important points of your form. All right, and in this case, there are actually 8 important points. They have A, B, C, and D marked out right here. But it's important to also know where these other bottom points are. Right? You're going to cast your shadow lines, and then you're going to connect the points. Let's talk about light sources. There's 2 typical light sources in an architectural drawing, and one is a natural light source, typically the sun, and the other one is an artificial light source, typically a lamp. All right. Let's talk a little bit more about the sun. All right, the sun rises in the east, it sets in the west, and it's extremely variable. It varies with the time of day, it varies with the seasons, and it varies with the latitude or your position on the earth. Right? And those are all variations in both the location of the sun, where it is with respect to you and your building or your object. It also varies in qualitative terms. Is it brighter or darker? Is it warmer or cooler? All right, but today we're talking about quantitative. Where is the sun's location? When you want to identify the sun's location, it can be described with 2 angles. And the first one is altitude. All right, altitude is going to be the angle between the sun's vertical position and the Earth's horizon. The azimuth will be a bearing angle between true north and wherever the sun happens to be, kind of in a horizontal plane. I have a great video for you in your module that walks you through some of the different positions of the sun over the year. All right, but for this basic class in casting shadows, one very important point that we need to talk about is because the sun is so far away from our position on Earth, we can assume that all the light rays cast by the sun are parallel. This is not true for artificial light sources. They are going to radiate from a point that you can locate in your drawing at the center of the light source. All right, and we'll talk about that a little later when we talk about perspective drawings. So the closer the light source is to the form of the object that is casting the shadow, the more the shadow is going to fan out from that source. All right, and this is characteristic of point light sources that are close to your objects. It's not characteristic of shadows cast by the sun. All right, everybody, in this video, we just did a quick overview of shadows. You learned about what shade and shadows are and what how they're different. And we talked about the different types of light sources.